Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're looking at something pretty unique, a kind of conceptual map about personal influence,
Mm,
agency,
yeah.
really responsibility too.
Yeah, it's quite something. We're diving into the lyrics of We Inject Life by Alison McLean.
Exactly. And we're treating these lyrics maybe unusually, not just as song lyrics, but almost like
Yeah.
a philosophical text,
Hmm.
a framework for how we interact with reality.
Or even create it. That's the core idea, isn't it? It uses this very scientific, almost medical language, vaccines, serums, doses, but applies it to, well, existential inputs.
Right. So our mission for this deep dive is really to unpack that metaphor, especially this central question that keeps coming back in the lyrics. What dose of vaccine are we personally injecting into reality?
Mm-hmm. It's a powerful framing question.
And it doesn't mess around, does it?
Yeah.
The lyrics set up the main loop almost immediately. As we inject into life, human becomes us.
That line is key. It's circular, right? It suggests the very act of participating, of putting something in, is what actually defines us.
Defines our identity, yeah.
Yeah.
Flips the script.
Totally. It's not saying, okay, here's humanity, now what does it do? It's saying the doing, the injecting, is what creates the human state. It's an outcome, not a starting point.
So the self isn't passive, it's an active agent, like a chemical doing the work.
Exactly. The substances we, handle internally, they determine the identity we end up with. We're being asked to see ourselves as part of the reaction from the get-go.
Okay, let's get into that mechanism more then. Because the principle behind it all is stated so plainly. What we put in our system becomes our system.
Simple, but profound.
If you accept that, then your personal reality, the one you experience, it's generated by this kind of closed loop, isn't it? What you put in dictates the whole system.
Yeah, it sounds almost like a self-help slogan, but philosophically it's got teeth. It really taps into systems thinking.
How so?
Well, the idea that the structure of any system is defined by its components. So if you consistently pump fear into your internal system,
Then the system organizes itself around fear.
right, it'll prioritize threat detection, it'll anticipate the worst, it'll look for evidence to confirm that fear. You're not just feeling fearful, you're actually building a system that's optimized for it.
And the lyrics get specific about these inputs, these ingredients. In those softly whisper sections, they set up these dualities immediately.
The contrasts are stark.
We see, as we inject love, love becomes us. And then right away, almost violently contrasted with, as we inject fear, fear becomes us.
The injection is the outcome. It defines the self.
Yeah.
Think about what that means practically. Injecting love isn't just about being nice to others.
It's about your internal architecture.
Yes. It means your system is built on connection, maybe trust, openness, and that system is going to process the world very differently from one built on fear, which sees threats everywhere, even in ambiguity.
And that pattern continues. It moves into belief systems. But the rule stays the same.
Yeah.
Input equals output. So as we inject faith, faith becomes us. Versus as we inject hate, hate becomes us.
These aren't minor tweaks, are they? The lyrics suggest these are the fundamental ideological choices. These doses are the deep building blocks.
So the system we become isn't random. It's the sum of what we choose to prioritize and, crucially, actively inject.
Right. If you inject hate, the world you perceive becomes a place that seems to require hate, maybe built on exclusion. Inject faith, and maybe the world appears to validate that trust.
Okay, before we move on from this part, there's one last injection mentioned. As we inject difference, difference becomes us. This one feels more complex.
It is. It's a bit ambiguous. Is difference just the natural result of all the other injections? My specific ratio of love, fear, faith, hate is unique, so difference just happens.
Or is it an independent dose?
Right.
Something you choose to inject?
That's the interesting question. If it's an intentional dose, that's a big statement about, radical self-agency, choosing to be unique.
But if it's just the inevitable outcome?
Then difference isn't really a choice. It's just the unavoidable nature of the system you construct. Your combination is just yours and inherently different.
Either way you read it, this whole first part gives you this really sharp assessment of personal agency, doesn't it? The power of your internal state to literally structure your external experience.
Absolutely. You're the architect, and the materials are these raw emotions and beliefs. And the structure you build is, by definition, different from every other one out there.
Which leads to a really important question. If I choose faith, okay, that makes my system. But my system doesn't exist in a vacuum, right? How does the song handle the fact that my system is bumping up against everyone else's?
Yes. That brings us neatly into the next layer. the scale of influence.
Right, because the lyrics describe reality creation in this almost paradoxical way. It happens in extreme complexity, yet simply at making our reality. Why both? Complex and simple, that feels like a contradiction.
Well, the complexity, I think that must come from the sheer volume of inputs, right? Just the astronomical number of things we're injecting.
Microdoses of everything all the time.
Exactly. Love, fear, doubt, belief. Every second, every interaction, every memory, every fleeting thought. The input stream is incredibly complex, chaotic even.
Okay, that makes sense for the complexity. But where does the simplicity come in?
The simplicity, I think, is in the underlying rule. It's universal and totally straightforward. Input equals system. That holds true no matter how messy the inputs get. And this is where the systemic impact really kicks in. Yeah, the chorus lays down this critical, almost inescapable rule about influence and scale. No matter the dosage, everything affects the whole.
Okay. So that connects the personal system right back to the bigger picture. If my private system, built on my injections, isn't isolated, then the whole must be the collective reality, shared reality.
That seems to be the implication. And this is where we really have to grapple with responsibility. Because it's telling us that even the tiniest, most private dose of fear or faith or whatever you inject into yourself, it unavoidably contributes to that overall shared system. There's no opting out. You can't not affect the whole.
Let me push back on that a little. Isn't that idea kind of paralyzing? Suggesting my tiny private moment of anxiety measurably affects the whole. Doesn't that just make people feel overwhelmed? Too much responsibility.
That's a fair point. It's a valid concern. But I don't think the framework is saying your single negative thought is going to, crash the system.
Okay.
It's more about affirming the principle of interconnectedness. Like chaos theory, maybe?
Yeah.
The idea of emergent properties. If the whole system is the sum of all the individual systems.
Then changing even one tiny part inevitably changes the whole thing, even if just a tiny bit.
Precisely. Eliminating even one microdose alters the overall composition, however infinitesimally. The mechanism of influence is unavoidable, even if the specific impact isn't always catastrophic or even noticeable.
That reframes the central metaphor too, the vaccine.
Yeah.
We keep asking, what dose of vaccine? Why a vaccine? Why not just input or ingredient? What does using the word vaccine add?
That's a great question. A vaccine implies, well, targeted intervention, doesn't it?
Yeah, like a small dose designed for a big effect.
Exactly. A small dose intended to provoke a massive specific response in the host system, often protective or preventative. This layer suggests agency, maybe even strategy.
So we're not just randomly tossing stuff in. We're choosing doses intended to produce a certain outcome in our system.
Perhaps subconsciously, yes. Love is a protective injection against cynicism. Hate as a targeted injection against connection. The choice of vaccine suggests these doses are chosen, however implicitly, for their intended systemic effect.
So every little action, thought, emotion, the microdose, is an intervention. And it's impossible not to influence the wider system just by managing our internal state.
That seems to be the core argument. If we want a certain kind of reality, we need to be deliberate about the doses we inject internally because the rule is absolute. No matter the size, everything affects the whole.
Wow. Okay, that idea really sets up this big existential turn later in the song, in the bridge. It shifts focus completely from what we're injecting to who is doing the injection.
That line hits hard. Are we the serum of nothing, yet injecting it all with our presence?
Yeah, that tension is, wow. Serum of nothing. What does that even mean?
Well, it could be taken a few ways, couldn't it? Maybe it means we start as a blank slate, tabula rasa, just latent, potential, neutral vessels waiting to be filled by our choices, our injections.
That's one reading. Kind of optimistic, in a way.
Or it could be darker, more nihilistic. Maybe it suggests we are fundamentally empty and our injections are just desperate attempts to create meaning where there isn't any inherent meaning.
So if we are this serum of nothing, we don't start with built-in qualities. But the power seems to come in the second half of the line. The idea that our sheer presence is the mechanism. How can our presence inject it all if we start as nothing?
Because within this framework, maybe existence is the active ingredient. Your presence itself becomes the dosage meter.
So even trying to be neutral doesn't work.
Apparently not. The mechanism of just being there, your presence, ensures the system is effective. Simply existing next to other systems, even if you feel completely passive, is presented as an active contribution.
That's kind of the terrifying beauty of it, isn't it? It makes non-action, non-influence impossible. If you're a neutral serum, your presence is still a catalyst. It forces the system around you to react, to incorporate your potential, or your perceived emptiness.
Yeah, it basically turns existence itself into an active contribution, whether you intend it or not.
And this need for intentional contribution, it feels like it's hammered home in the outro
Hmm.
with that repetition, just insisting on personally.
Oh, absolutely. It's
Persistently.
personally. It's almost obsessive. It's like it's grabbing you by the shoulders and demanding self-reflection. Are you aware that you are the specific source of this dose?
Yeah, it reinforces that whole theme that intentional self-aware contribution is the necessary response to understanding this philosophical framework.
This cycle, what we put in becomes us, and then what we are inevitably affects the whole. It makes that question, what dose?
Mhm.
Incredibly personal and vital. Vital for the health of the entire system, yeah. It's a really compelling argument for radical self-awareness. It forces you, the listener, to confront the nature of your own internal system and how it ripples outwards.
Okay, so let's try to quickly sum up the key ideas we've distilled from We Inject Life. First, our personal systems basically dictate our reality because what we feed them, love, fear, faith, hate, becomes the actual structure of ourselves.
Right. Input equals system. Second, every single dose, no matter how tiny, affects the whole collective reality. Non-influence just isn't an option.
And third, our simple presence, just existing, is itself an injection mechanism,
Right.
which forces us to think about who the injector is, even if we feel like this serum of nothing.
It's a really elegant framework connecting the deeply private emotional choice with this unavoidable public systemic effect. And using that scientific language makes it feel almost deterministic, law-like.
So let's leave you with a final provocative thought to chew on. It builds on that tricky idea we talked about. Difference becomes us. If we accept that we are all constantly injecting difference, our unique system, our unique dose into reality, and we also accept that everything affects the whole, well, what does that actually mean for the whole?
Does injecting constant difference lead to unity or fragmentation?
Exactly. If shared reality is always being shaped and reshaped by all these individual different injections, does the system inevitably shatter into fragments? Or, paradoxically, does injecting all that difference somehow create a more complex, maybe even more resilient, unified whole?
Something to think about, definitely, as you consider what dose you might be injecting today.